In section 3, we provided a brief overview about blockchain and types of blockchain. In section 3, we will be proceeding with the advanced concepts of blockchain. In lecture 7, consensus, lecture 8, smart contracts, lecture 9, components of blockchain project ecosystems, lecture 10, security in blockchain and top investors in blockchain, lecture 11, blockchain benefits, challenges and standards. So now, let's look at what is consensus and the various consensus mechanisms. So how do you define consensus? Consensus mechanisms, as you can see here, is a way to guarantee a mutual agreement on a data point and the state. So for example, in the blockchain, if you are talking about a transaction which is to be stored in the block, this is the data. The value is a state. So there should be a mutual agreement among all the members that this particular transaction is valid and it has to be added to the block. This will ensure that each node in the network has the copy of the same ledger. Now, what is the impact of consensus? It enables secure data storage after agreement by the concerned blockchain members, that is the peer members. And consensus also enables an economic framework for cryptographic protocol to be used and how it will be used. And consensus mechanism comes in various forms, and depending on the number of peers involved, how do they agree, how many will be required to come together, we have different consensus mechanisms which we will see in the next slide. The most basic and the very common consensus mechanism is by Bitcoin, which is called as proof of work. So consensus, in other words, as we said over here, ways to guarantee mutual agreement, it's also something like a voting. So a dynamic way of reaching an agreement. So like voting will settle down and ensure that there's a majority, and this will also ensure well-being of the minority. So consensus doesn't talk about well-being, but it will ensure that agreement is reached even though there was some benefit of doubts earlier, and the agreement is by the entire group. So this is a decision making process. So it's very important to understand that without consensus, blockchain does not exist. So consensus mechanism basically involves the decision making process to ensure that the correct validated data or the transaction is entered into the block. So once we have understood the basic definition of the blockchain and the consensus mechanism and the impact, let's look at the objectives of a consensus mechanism. The first one is called as seeking an agreement. The first major objective of the consensus mechanism is to ensure that there should be an agreement among all the members of the group. The group could be all, it could be part, it could be depending on the stake, etc. But it should be agreement by all in the group. So for example, when I spoke about the public blockchain, it would be all the peer members. In case of a private blockchain, it is the members of the organization who have formed that group. So agreement is the first objective. Second objective is collaboration or collaborate. All the participants should aim to work together to achieve the consensus result, and they should ensure that the validation of the transaction comes before any other interest of individual members of the group. The next objective is cooperation. All the members should put their interests aside and work as a team to ensure that validation is achieved. The other objective is egalitarian, means if a group is trying to achieve the consensus, they should ensure that each and every one has equal weightage to vote, and no one person's vote is having a larger weight compared to the others. The next objective is inclusiveness. So Try to include as many members of the group as possible to achieve the consensus mechanism. So even if a member says I don't want to vote, it doesn't work like that. Everybody has to get involved to take part in the validation process. And final objective of consensus should be participatory, means it should involve everyone and all the members should actively participate in the validation process. So what we saw here basically was the definition of consensus, achieving mutual agreement for the data. The impact is secure storage because it is validated by everybody, and the objectives: seek agreement, collaborate, cooperate, egalitarian, inclusiveness, and participatory. Then let's look at a few examples of different types of consensus mechanisms. The first one is called as proof of work, which is deployed by the Bitcoin. The person who's involved in carrying out validation is called a miner. So a miner who finds the hash first will be allowed to add a new block of the transaction to the blockchain. So everybody starts mining the complex process of hashing. The hashed keys are mined by everybody, and the miner who gets the hash first will be allowed to add a new block after validation. In proof of stake, now proof of work involves everybody to get into mining, which involves a lot of computational power. To reduce that, proof of stake was evolved. So based on the participant's coin stake, how many coins the participant has got, the more the coins the staker has, the more likely the staker will add a new block of transaction to the blockchain. So if there were two miners and one of them had a larger stake, then he will have the right to add the transaction to the blockchain. Proof of stake basically reduces the number of participants involved as compared to proof of work, and it decreases the time for mining as well as it decreases the computational power involved. A small modification of the proof of stake is called as the delegated proof of stake, where the coin holders can use their balance to elect a list of nodes who will be possibly allowed to add new blocks of transactions to the blockchain. Now see how we differ from the proof of stake to the delegated proof of stake. So all the members who have coins can use their balance to elect a list of nodes. So those list of nodes will be the ones who will take part in the validation process. And then we have another algorithm or mechanism called as PBFT, practical Byzantine fault tolerance. This particular consensus mechanism relies on the number of nodes to confirm the trust. So once enough responses are reached, the transaction is verified to be a valid transaction. So PBFT basically is based on the Byzantine fault tolerance, which was talked about in agreement and distributed systems. So it will rely on the number of nodes to confirm the trust, and once that trust is achieved, then the transaction will be verified. So in this particular section, we initially explained the definition of consensus, the objectives of consensus, how consensus plays an important role in validating a transaction before the data can be added to the blockchain. Then we looked at the different consensus mechanisms. There are many more actually, but we have not taken that based on the scope. And probably we are working on another Udemy course talking about the various consensus mechanisms in detail. You can always go through it later. It will be coming up soon. So after the advanced concepts of blockchain, that is consensus mechanisms, we move to lecture 8, where we will talk about smart contracts.